You wake up and life begins to move. The body gets up, walks, speaks, works. On the outside, everything flows. There are no bars, no locked doors, no visible obstacles. And still, there is a strange sense of confinement that follows you from early on. It is not dramatic. It is not fear, panic, or crisis. It is quieter than that. It is like always being inside your own head, even when the world is open, as if experience is never direct, only observed. You take part in life, but you never quite step outside yourself. You talk, respond, react, and yet there is a constant layer of internal observation. You are there, but at the same time you see yourself being there. Everything passes inward before it reaches the world. The body feels free. It moves without excessive effort. There is no external blockage. Routine happens. Responsibilities are met. But the mind remains compressed, as if the inner space was smaller than it should be. There is no specific thought that explains this. It is not a clear worry. It is not a concrete problem asking for a solution. It is simply the feeling of always being inside, looking at everything from within, living everything from that closed place. Even in moments that should bring relief, something does not open. A break, a pause, a moment of quiet. The body responds, but the mind stays withdrawn, folded into itself, as if there were no exit from that space. It does not arrive as despair. It arrives as pressure, a soft, constant, almost polite claustrophobia. It does not shout, it does not paralyze, it does not interrupt. It simply accompanies every experience with a sense of inner limit. You notice that you are always watching yourself, watching the thought, watching the reaction, watching even rest. And this constant observation creates the feeling of being trapped inside your own point of view, unable to fully step out of it. None of this stops you from functioning. You remain capable. You remain responsible. You remain present in the eyes of others. And that is exactly why this feeling is so hard to name, so easy to ignore. Over time, you get used to this internal confinement. It becomes the background of experience. You do not complain. You do not dramatize. You do not fight it. You simply live with the constant sense of being slightly compressed on the inside. It is strange because it does not seem like something that deserves urgent attention. Life goes on. The demands are real. People rely on you. And still, there is this quiet feeling of being trapped within yourself. Perhaps the hardest part is realizing that this prison has no clear walls. There is no exact moment when it begins. It is simply there, accompanying each day, each decision, each moment lived from the inside. Recognizing this feeling does not bring immediate answers. It does not offer a quick exit. But naming the pressure already changes something inside, because for the first time, you realize that you are not alone in this silent experience that few people know how to describe. What makes this experience even heavier is the fact that, objectively, nothing seems wrong. Life is functioning. There is no obvious problem asking for immediate resolution. There is no clear crisis that justifies this sense of inner closure. And yet, everything feels closed on the inside. The mind becomes a space with no visible exit, not because something is blocking it, but because there is no sense of opening. You try to feel present, to engage directly, but everything seems to pass first through an internal filter, as if you are never fully outside your own head. There is a constant sense of watching life from the inside, even while you are participating in it. Each experience is accompanied by a quiet internal commentary. Every moment is lived and observed at the same time. This creates a subtle but continuous distance. Nothing is wrong enough to justify the wait. Nothing is broken. Nothing demands fixing. And still, there is a persistent discomfort, hard to explain, that makes everything feel more closed than it should. You might be in a pleasant environment, in a calm moment, surrounded by normalcy. The body is there, the situation is simple, but the mind does not open. It remains withdrawn, contained, as if there were not enough inner space to spread out. This sensation does not come from a specific thought. It does not arise from a clearly negative idea. It is more diffuse. It is the perception of always being inside, always following everything from an internal point that never dissolves. Over time, living like this becomes tiring, not because of excessive physical or emotional effort, but because of the weight of constantly watching yourself. There is a weariness in living everything internally, in never simply being without noticing that you are being. This fatigue is not obvious. It does not stop action. You continue doing what needs to be done, but you feel that everything requires more mental presence than it should. Even simple moments seem to demand an attention that does not release. There is a subtle difficulty in feeling truly present, not because you are distracted, but because you are too focused on what is happening inside. The mind becomes the main place of experience, and the external world is always one step away. This creates the feeling of confinement. There is no clear enemy. There is nothing to fight. There is only this closed inner space where everything happens and from which it feels difficult to step out. The paradox is exactly that. Nothing is wrong. Life is in order. And still, everything feels tight on the inside, as if the mind had become the only livable place, even when the world is open. This experience is rarely talked about. It does not seem serious enough. It does not seem legitimate enough. And so it remains quiet, accompanying the days, shaping how you live each moment, always from the inside. Over time, this closed state stops feeling temporary and starts being lived as normal. The mind enters a kind of internal circuit that repeats itself day after day, almost unnoticed. Thoughts arise, circulate, return to the same point, and disappear only to come back later, with small variations. They are not intense thoughts. They are not dramatic ideas. They are fragments, small analyses, silent reviews, questions that do not require immediate answers, but that also do not close on their own. And because of that, they keep spinning. The sensation is of always being inside this circuit. Nothing truly moves forward. Nothing fully resolves. Nothing closes. The mind stays busy, but without clear direction, as if trapped in an automatic movement that leads nowhere. This way of functioning does not begin as a problem. It installs itself gradually. At first, it feels like attention. Then it feels like care. Later, it becomes a quiet habit. The mind learns to follow everything internally, all the time, without real pauses. And because this does not prevent external functioning, no one notices, not even you. Life continues. Tasks get done. Conversations happen. But internally, there is this constant confinement. This always being inside, always circling your own perceptions. The cost of this does not appear explosively. It appears as wear. An emotional fatigue that is hard to locate. A sense of weight with no clear origin. An exhaustion that does not come from a specific event, but from continuous repetition. Living in this closed circuit requires energy. It does not seem to require it, but it does. Each thought followed, each idea revisited, each mental scene repeated consumes something. And because it happens in small doses, the consumption goes unnoticed. Over time, this inner prison becomes so familiar that it stops being questioned. You learn to live this way. You learn to operate within this closed space. You learn to consider it normal to always feel a little contained on the inside. The problem is that this normalization removes the ability to notice how heavy it is. The confinement becomes the background of experience. It does not draw enough attention to be named, but it influences everything. There is also an emotional effect to this. Always being in a closed circuit reduces the sense of inner expansion. Experiences feel smaller. The inner space feels limited. Life happens, but always within a tight contour. This invisible cycle continues precisely because it is not seen as a cycle. It is lived as me. As if this closed mode were simply who you are, and not a state that settled over time. Recognizing this pattern does not bring an immediate exit. It does not dissolve the confinement all at once. But it begins to create an important difference. The difference between being the circuit and noticing the circuit. And this perception, even if subtle, already begins to lighten the weight a little. Because for the first time, the internal confinement stops being merely lived and starts being understood as something that formed, not as a personal defect, When this state of internal imprisonment starts to be seen this way, something changes in the tone of the experience. Not because the mind suddenly opens, nor because thoughts disappear, but because the relationship with this closure stops being accusatory. What once felt like personal failure starts to be understood as an effect of functioning. The mind did not close because you are weak, inattentive, or incapable of relaxing. It closed because it learned to operate continuously. It learned to track everything. It learned to maintain constant presence over its own experience. And when a system learns to function this way, it does not stop on its own. This excess of functioning creates the feeling of always being inside. Not because something is wrong now, but because there were no real pauses over time. The mind stayed active for too long, without clear points of closure, and systems that never close tend to fold in on themselves. Understanding this changes the emotional weight of the experience. The confinement stops being an error and becomes a result. A predictable result of continuous attention, constant observation, mental presence that never fully switches off. This understanding does not offer a quick solution. It does not promise immediate opening. It does not teach how to get out. It does something simpler and more honest. It removes blame. It removes judgment. It removes the feeling that there is something fundamentally wrong with you. When blame leaves the scene, a small inner space is created. A space that did not exist before because everything was being lived as failure. And that space, however small, is already different from absolute confinement. The mind remains active. Thoughts continue to arise. The feeling of being inside still appears. But now, there is a layer of understanding that softens the experience. You are not trapped because you failed. You are trapped because the mind did not stop. Clarity, in this context, is not total freedom. It is not inner silence. It is not constant lightness. Clarity is being able to see the functioning without completely merging with it. It is noticing the circuit without needing to fight it. This clearer view begins to reduce internal friction. The mind no longer needs to defend itself from itself. It does not need to prove efficiency. It does not need to justify fatigue. It simply continues functioning, but now under a less hostile gaze. Over time, this change in relationship makes a difference. Not as a dramatic event, but as a quiet adjustment. The confinement loses some of its rigidity. The inner space, still limited, stops feeling completely closed. None of this solves everything. None of this eliminates the state of being inside, but it changes how you inhabit that space. And inhabiting it with less conflict is already a meaningful change. The mind that once felt like a prison begins to be seen as a tired system, not an enemy. A system that operated too much without real rest. A system that did not learn how to stop, not because you failed, but because it was never taught to function differently. This understanding does not end the process. It simply creates the first real space inside an environment that once felt completely closed. And often, that is exactly where something begins to reorganize, not through force, not through control, but through understanding. The feeling of being trapped inside your own mind does not disappear all at once. But when it stops being interpreted as a personal defect, it loses part of the weight it carried. And that subtly and deeply changes the way you live inside your own head.